Too Loud a Solitude, a novel. Chapter 1. For 35 years now, I've been in waste paper, and it's my love story. For 35 years, I've been compacting waste paper and books, smearing myself with letters until I've come to look like my encyclopedia, and a good 3 tons of them I've compacted over the years. I am a jug filled with water, both magic and plain. I have only to lean over, a stream of beautiful thoughts flows out of me. My education has been so unwitting that I can't quite tell which of my thoughts come from me and which come from my books. But that's how I've stayed attuned in myself and the world around me for the past 35 years. Because when I read, I don't really read. I pop a beautiful sentence into my mouth and suck it like a fruit drop, or I sip it like a liquor until the thought dissolves in me like alcohol, infusing brain and heart and coursing on through the veins to the root of each blood vessel. In an average month, I compact 2 tons of books, but to muster the strength for my godly labors, I've drunk so much beer over the past 35 years that it could fill an Olympic pool, an entire fish hatchery. Such wisdom as I have has come to me unwittingly, and I look on my brain as a mass of hydraulically compacted thoughts, a bale of ideas, and on my head as smooth, shiny Aladdin's lamp. How much more beautiful it must have been in the days when the only place a thought could make its mark was the human brain, and anybody wanting to squelch ideas had to compact human heads. But even that wouldn't have helped, because real thoughts come from outside and travel with us like noodle soup we take to work. In other words, inquisitors burn books in vain. If a book has anything to say, it burns with a quiet laugh, because any book worth its salt points up and out of itself. I've just bought one of those minuscule Alder subtractor square rotors, a tiny little contraption no bigger than a wallet, and after screwing up my courage, I pried open the back with a screwdriver, and I was shocked and tickled to find nothing but an even tinier contraption, smaller than a postage stamp and thinner than 10 pages of a book. That and air charged with mathematical variations. When my eye lands on a real book and looks past the printed word, what it sees is disembodied thoughts flying through air, gliding on air, living off air, returning to air. Because in the end, everything is air, just as the host is and is not the blood of Christ. For 35 years now, I've been compacting old paper and books, living as I do in a land that has known how to read and write for 15 generations, living in a one-time kingdom where it was and still is a custom, an obsession, to compact thoughts and images patiently in the heads of the population, thereby bringing them an ineffable joy and an even greater woe, living among people who will lay down their lives for a bale of compacted thoughts. Now, it is all recurring to me, along with 35 years pushing the red and green buttons in hydraulic press. I've had 35 years of drinking beer. Not that I enjoy it, no, I loathe drunkards. I drink to make me think better, to go to the heart of what I read, because what I read not for the fun of it, or to kill time, or to fall asleep. I, who live in a land that has known how to read and write for 15 generations, drink so that what I will read will prevent me from falling into everlasting sleep, will give me the DTs, because I share with Hegel the view that a noble-hearted man is not yet a noble man, nor a criminal a murderer. If I even knew how to write, I'd write a book about the greatest of man's joys and sorrows. It is by and from books I've learned that the heavens are not humane, neither the heavens nor any man with a head on his shoulders. It's not that men don't wish to be humane. It just goes against common sense. Rare books perish in my press, under my hands, yet I am unable to stop their flow. I am nothing but a refined butcher. Books have taught me the joy of devastation. I love cloudbursts and demolition crews. I can stand for hours watching the carefully coordinated pumping motions of detonation experts as they blast entire houses, entire streets into the air, while seeming only to fill tires. I can't get enough of that first moment, the one that lifts all the bricks and stones and beams only to cave them in quietly, like clothes dropping, like a steamer sinking swiftly to the ocean floors when its boilers have burst. There I stand in the cloud of dust, in the music of flammation, thinking of my work deep down in the cellar where I have my press, the one I've been working for 35 years by the light of a few electric bulbs, and where above me I hear steps moving across the courtyard, and through an opening in the ceiling, which is also a hole in the middle of the courtyard, I see heaven-sent horns of plenty in the form of bags, crates, boxes raining down their old paper, withered flower shop stalks, wholesalers' wrappings, out-of-date theater programs, ice cream wrappers, sheets of paint-spattered wallpaper, piles of moist, bloody paper from the butchers, razor-sharp rejects from photographers' studios, insides of office waste paper baskets, typewriter ribbons included, bouquets from birthdays and name days long past. Sometimes I find a cobblestone buried in a bundle of newspapers to make it weigh more, or a penknife and a pair of scissors disposed of by mistake, or claw hammers, or cleavers, or cups with dried black coffee still in them, or faded wedding nosegays wound round with fresh artificial funeral wreaths. For 35 years, I've been compacting it all in my hydraulic press, and 3 times a week it is transported by truck to train and then on the paper mill, where they snap the wires and dump my work into alkalis and acids strong enough to dissolve the razor blades I keep gouging my hands with. But just as beautiful fish will occasionally sparkle in the waters of a polluted river that runs through a stretch of factories, so in the flow of old paper the spine of a rare book will occasionally shine forth. And if for a moment I turn away dazzled, I always turn back in time to rescue it. And after wiping it off on my apron, opening it wide, and breathing in its print, I glue my eyes to the text and read out the first sentence like a Homeric prophecy. Then I place it carefully among my other splendid finds in a small crate lined with the holy cards someone once dropped into my cellar by mistake with a load of prayer books. And then comes my ritual, my mass. Not only do I read every one of those books, I take each and put it in a bale, because I have a need to garnish my bales, give them my stamp, my signature, and I always worry about whether I've made a bale distinctive enough. I have to spend 2 hours overtime in the cellar working every day. I have to get to work an hour early. Sometimes I have to come in on Saturdays if I want to work my way through the never-ending mountain of old paper. Last month, they delivered nearly 1,500 pounds of old masters reproductions, dropped nearly 1,500 pounds of sopping wet Rembrandts, I believe that's how you say that, Rembrandts, Houses, Monettes, Calmets, Sinestas. This is not an English word, and other big guns of European art into my cellar. So now I frame each of my bales with reproductions, and when evening comes and the bales stand one next to the other, waiting in all their splendor for the service elevator, I can't take my eyes off them. Now the night watch, now Sastika, here Leyaner sur la herba, there the house of the hanged man at Nevers, or Genusia. Besides, I'm the only one on earth who knows that deep into the heart of each bale there's a wide open Faust or Don Carlos. Then there, buried beneath a mound of blood-soaked cardboard, lies a Hyperion. There, cushioned on piles of cement bags, rests Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I'm the only one on earth who knows which Bale has Goethe, which has Schiller, which Hölderlin, which Nietzsche. In a sense, I am both an artist and audience, but the only pressure does me in, but the daily pressure does me in, tires me out, racks me, sears me, and to reduce and restrict my enormous self-output, I drink beer after beer, and on my way to Hasinski's for refills, I have time to meditate and dream about what my next bale is going to look like. The only reason I down so much beer is to see into the future, because in every bale I bury a precious relic. Oh, relic. I bury a precious relic, a child's open coffin, sewn with weathered flowers, tinsel, and angel's hair, and I make a nice little bed for the books that turn up unexpectedly in the cellar, much as I myself turned up there one day. That's why I'm always behind in my work, why the courtyard is piled to the rooftops with old paper that can't go down the opening in the ceiling of my cellar for the mountain of old paper blocking it from below. That's why my boss, his face scarlet with rage, will sometimes stick his hook through the opening and clear away enough paper to shout down to me, Hanta, where are you, for Christ's sake? Will you stop oogling those books and get to work? The courtyard's piled high with paper, and you sit there dreaming. And I huddle in the lee of my paper mountain like Adam in the bushes and pick up a book, and my eyes open, panic-stricken on a world other than my own, because when I start reading, I'm somewhere completely different. I'm in the text. It's amazing. I have to admit I've been dreaming in a land of great beauty. I've been in the very heart of truth. 10 times a day, every day, I wonder at having wandered so far, and then, alienated from myself, a stranger to myself, I go home, walking the streets silently and in deep meditation, passing trams and cars and pedestrians in a cloud of books, the books that I found that day and am carrying home in my briefcase. Lost in my dreams, I somehow cross at the traffic signals, never bumping into street lamps or people, yet moving onward, exuding fumes of beer and grime, yet smiling because my briefcase is full of books, and that very night I expect them to tell me things about myself I do not know. On I go through the noisy streets, never crossing at the red. I walk subconsciously unconscious, half asleep, subliminally inspired, with every bale I've compacted that day fading softly and quietly inside of me. I have a physical sense of myself as a bale compacted of compacted books, the seat of a tiny pilot light of karma, like a flame in a gas refrigerator, an eternal flame I feed daily with the oil of my thoughts, which come from what I unwittingly read during the work in the books I am now taking home in my briefcase. So I walk home, like a burning house, like a burning stable, the light of my life pouring out of the fire, fire pouring out of the dying wood, hostile sorrow lingering under the ashes. For 35 years now, I've been compacting old paper in my hydraulic press. I've got 5 years till retirement, and my press is going with me. I won't abandon it. I'm saving up. I've got my own bank book, and the press and me will retire together, because I'm going to buy it from the firm, and I'm going to take it home and stash it somewhere among the trees in my uncle's garden. And then, when the time is right, I'll make only one bale a day. But what a bale! A bale to end all bales, a statue, an artifact. I'll pour all my youthful illusions into it, everything I know, everything I've learned during my 35 years of work. At last, I'll work only when the spirit moves me, when I feel inspired. One bale a day, from the 3 tons of books I have waiting at home. A bale I'll never need to be ashamed of. A bale I'll have time to think out, dream out in advance. And more important, while I line in the drum of my press with books and old paper, while I, in the throes of creation, but just before I turn the pressure on, I'll sprinkle it all with confetti and seguins, a new bale a day, and when a year is up, an exhibition. I'll hold a bale exhibition in the garden, and all the people who come will be able to make their own. Though under my supervision, and when the green light goes on and the press starts churning, starts its tremendous, powerful churning, starts crushing and compacting the old paper, trimmed with books and flowers and whatever refuse people happen to have brought along. The sensitive spectator will personally experience the compaction in my hydraulic press, but now I am at home, sitting on a chair, my head drooping lower and lower until I drift off the only way I know how, moist lips against raised knees. Sometimes I remain in my thonnet position as late as midnight, and when I awake, curled up, coiled up in myself like a cat in winter, like a rocking chair frame, I lift my head to find my trouser knee drenched with drool. I can be by myself because I'm never lonely. I'm simply alone, living in my heavily populated solitude, a harum sucarum of infinity and eternity, and infinity and eternity seem to take a liking to the likes of me. Chapter 2. For 35 years now, I've been compacting old paper, and I found so many books tossed into my cellar that if I had 3 barns, they'd all be full. Just after the war was over, the second one, somebody dumped a basket of the most exquisitely made volumes in my hydraulic press, and when I had calmed down enough to open one of them, what I did see but the stamp of the Royal Prussian Library, and when the next day I found a whole cellar overflowing with more of the same leather-bound tomes, their glit edges and titles flooding the air with light, I raced upstairs to see 2 fellows standing there, and what I managed to squeeze out of them was that somewhere in the vicinity of these are Czech words, Nova Strneci, there was a barn with so many books in the straw that it made your eyes pop out of your head. So I went to see the army librarian, and 2 of us took off for Nova Streleci, and there in the fields we found not 1 but 3 barns full of the Royal Prussian Library. And once we had done owing and awing, we had a good talk, as a result of which, a column of military vehicles spent a week transporting the books to a wing of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Prague, where they were to wait until things simmered down, when they could be sent back to their place of origin. But somebody leaked the hiding place, and the Royal Prussian Library was declared official booty. So the column of military vehicles started transporting all of the leather-bound tomes with their glit edges and titles over to the railroad station, where they were loaded on flat cars in the rain. And since it poured the whole week, when I saw when the last load of books pulled up from the constant flow of gold water and soot and printer's ink coming from the train, well, I just stood there, leaning against the lamppost, flabbergasted, and as the last car disappeared into the mist, I felt the rain on my face merging with tears. So when, on my way out of the station, I saw a policeman in uniform, I crossed my wrist and begged him with the utmost sincerity to take out his handcuffs, his bracelets, as we used to call them, and take me in. I'd committed a crime against humanity, and when he did take me in, all they did was laugh at me and threaten to lock me up. A few more years of the same, though, and I got used to it. I would load entire libraries from country castles and city mansions, fine, rare, leather-end, Morocco-bound books, load whole trains full, and as soon as a train had 30 cars, off it would go to Switzerland or Austria, 1 kilogram of rare books for the equivalent of 1 crown in convertible currency, and nobody blinked an eye, nobody shed a tear, not even I myself, No. All I did was stand there smiling as I watched the train hauling those priceless libraries off to Switzerland and Austria for 1 crown in convertible currency a kilo. By then, I mustered the strength to look upon misfortune with composure, to still my emotions. By then, I had begun to understand the beauty of destruction, and I loaded more and more freight cars, and more trains left the station, heading west at 1 crown per kilogram. And as I stood there, staring after the red lantern hanging from the last car, as I stood there leaning on the lamppost like Leonardo da Vinci, who stood leaning on a column and looking on while French soldiers used his statue for target practice, shooting away horse and rider bit by bit, I thought how Leonardo, like me, standing and witnessing such horrors with complete composure, had realized even then that neither the heavens are humane, nor is any man with a head on his shoulders. At about that time, I received a word that my mother was dying. So I immediately hopped on my bike and rode home. But since I happened to be thirsty, I ran down to the cellar and grabbed a cold earthenware jug of sour milk, picked it up with both hands, and was gulping it down greedily when all at once I saw 2 eyes floating opposite my own. But I was so thirsty that I went on drinking until the 2 eyes were as dangerously close to the lights of a locomotive speeding into a tunnel at night, and suddenly the eyes disappeared, and my mouth was full of something ringingly alive, and I pulled a frog out of it by the leg, and as soon as I had disposed of it in the garden, I went back and polished off the milk a la Leonardo. When Mom died, I cried a bit to myself, but never shed a tear. Leaving the crematorium, I watched the smoke rising from the chimney into the sky, watched Mama making her way upward to the heavens, but before leaving, I decided to take a trip downstairs. After all, didn't they do in their cellar with people what I did in my cellar with books? Anyway, I waited until the service was over and watched them burning 4 corpses, the third of which was Mama, looked on motionless at the final state of man, observed my counterpart picking out the bones, grinding them in his hand mill, grinding up Mama too, and laying her earthly remains in a metal box. And all I could do was stand there and stare, the way I stared after the train taking those beautiful libraries off to Switzerland and Austria at 1 convertible crown a kilo. Stand there and think of the lines from Sandburg about how all that remains of a man is the phosphorus for a box of matches, or the iron for a noose-worthy nail. A month later, I got them to sign the urn over to me, and when I took Mama's ashes to my uncle, carried them out to his garden and up his signal tower, he called out to them, "Home again at last, eh, sis?" And when I gave him the urn, he weighed it in his hand and declared she wasn't all there. She weighed a full 165 pounds when she was alive. So he weighed her on a scale and then sat down and worked out that there ought to be another 1¾ ounces of her. Anyway, he placed the urn on a wardrobe, and once that summer, while he was hoeing out the kohlrabi? Kohlrabi? This is not a word I'm familiar with. It looks like a German word. He thought of his sister, my mother, and how he loved kohlrabi. So he took down the urn and opened it with a bottle opener and scattered Mama's ashes over the kohlrabi, which we later ate. Wait, is it a type of food? I guess it's a type of food. For a long time thereafter, I would hear the crunch of human skeletons whenever my hydraulic press entered its final phase and crushed the beautiful books with a force of 20 atmospheres. I would hear the crunch of human skeletons and feel I was grinding up the skulls and bones of press-crushed classics, the part of the Talmud that says, for we are like the olives. Only when we are crushed do we yield what is best of us." I guess it was a Jewish food. After the crushing is over, I do each bale with steel bands, pulling them as tight as possible so that, try as the books may to break out, The steel holds, and I think of the full to bursting chest of my sideshow strongman, who rends his chains by forcing yet more air into his lungs. But the bale is safe in the strong embrace of the steel bands. Everything is as calm as inside the burial urn, and I reverently dolly it over to its mates, making sure to turn it so that the reproductions face me. Because this week I've started in on 100 reproductions of Rembrandt von Regen. 100 portraits of the old artist with the mushroom face, the face of a man pushed to the brink of eternity by art and drink, the door handle starting to turn, the final door pushed open from without by an unknown hand. And I'm beginning to have his pull-paste face, that peeling, pist-soaked wall of a face. I'm beginning to smile his half-moronic smile, to look at the world from the other side of human causes and events, and all my bales these days are framed with that portrait of Rembrandt Rentgen, as an old man while I keep filling my drum with waste paper and open books. Today, for the first time, I notice I'd stopped looking out for the mice, their nests, their families. When I throw in blind baby mice, the mother jumps in after them, sticks by them, and stares and shares the fate of my classics and waste paper. You wouldn't believe how many mice there are in a cellar like mine. 200, 500 maybe, most of them friendly little creatures, born half blind. But there's one thing we have in common, namely a vital need for literature, with a marked preference for Goethe and Schiller and Morocco bindings. My cellar is constantly full of blinkings and gnawings. In their free time, the mice are as playful as kittens, climbing up and down the sides of the press and pattering along the horizontal shaft. Then the green button sets the drum wall in motion and throws paper and mice into high-stress situation. And the cheeping follows... Cheeping? Yeah. And the cheeping fades, and the mice in the other parts of the cellar suddenly turn serious and stand on their hind legs, prick up their ears, wondering what those new noises are. But since mice lose track of the moment as soon as the moment is over, they go right back to their games, to munching books. The older the paper, the tastier it is, like a well-aged cheese or a vintage wine. My life is so tightly bound up with these mice that even though I give all the paper a good evening housing, which for the mice is like a daily dunking, they're always in a good mood, and even look forward to their bath. They enjoy the aftermath, hours of licking and warming themselves in their paper retreats. Sometimes I lose control over my mice. I go out for a beer, lost in deep meditation. I dream as I wait at the bar, and when I open my coat to reach for my wallet, out jumps a mouse on the counter. Or when I leave, out scurries a pear from a trouser leg, and the waitresses go wild, climb on chairs, stick with their fingers in their ears, and scream bloody murder. And I just smile and wave a wet goodbye, full of plans for my next bale. For 35 years now, I've been throwing each bale into a high-stress situation, crossing off every year, every month, every day in the month until we both retire, my press and I. I've been bringing home books every evening in my briefcase, and my two-floor Hostolvis apartment? I guess this is the name of a city. And my two-floor Hostolvis apartment is all books. What with the cellar and the shed long since packed, and the kitchen and pantry and even bathroom full, the only space free is a path to the window and stove. Even the bathroom has only room enough for me to sit down in just above the toilet bowl, about 5 feet off the floor. I have a whole series of shelves, planked, piled high to the ceiling, holding over 1,000 pounds of books, and one careless roost, one careless rise, one brush with a shelf, and half a ton of books would come tumbling down on me, catching me with my pants down. And even there was no room for even a single edition. I pushed my twin beds together and rigged a kind of canopy of planks over them, ceiling high for the 2 additional tons of books I've carried home over the years, and when I fall asleep, I've got all those books weighing down on me like a 2-ton nightmare. Sometimes when I'm careless enough to turn in my sleep, or call out or twitch, I am horrified to hear the books start to slide, because it would take little more than a raised knee or a shout to bring them all down like an avalanche, a cornucopia of rare books, and squash me like a flea. There are nights when I think that the books are plotting against me for compacting 100 innocent mice a day, that they want to get even with me, and well, they might. Our transgressiveness haunt us. I lie on my back half drunk under a canopy of miles and miles of texts, trying not to remember, but then I'll think of the time that the local forester caught a meriton in an inside sleeve lining, and instead of killing it justly for having gobbled up some chickens, he took a nail, hammered it into his head, and then let go, darting and howling around the yard until it died. And then I'll remember how a year later the forester's son was killed by a live wire while repairing a cement mixer. Just yesterday, the figure of the forester came back to me, out of the blue, under my canopy, and I remembered him sharpening a stick each time he came across a hedgehog, curled up in a ball, and sinking that sharp stick into the hedgehog's stomach. He was too cheap to waste a bullet until one day he took to bed with cancer of the liver, and in return for all of those hedgehogs, he spent 3 long months curled up in a ball, a tumor in his stomach, and a horror in his brain before he died. Such are the thoughts that make me panic when I hear the books above me plotting their revenge, and I am so terrified by the prospect of having them flatten me and then crash through each floor all the way to the basement, like an elevator, that I prefer sleeping in my chair by the window. The way, the way I look at it, my life fits together beautifully. At my work, I have books and bottles and inkwells and staplers raining down on me through the opening in the cellar ceiling, and at home, I have books above me, constantly threatening to fall or kill or at least maim me. The swords of Damocles? I've encountered this word but never have known how to pronounce it. Damocles? The swords of Damocles that I've hung from my bathroom and bedroom ceilings force me to make as many trips for beer at home as at work. It's my only defense against a beautiful misery. Once a month I go and visit my uncle and look around in his garden for the place to put my press when we retire. The idea of saving up and buying the hydraulic press when I retire was his, not mine. He spent 40 years as a railroad man, raising and lowering the gates at crossings, 40 years as a signal man, 40 years, like me, enjoying nothing but work. And when he retired, he found that he couldn't live without a signal tower. So he picked up one secondhand at a border station no longer in use and had brought it back to his garden. And then some of his friends, who were retired engineers, chipped in on a small locomotive in Orenstein and Koppel that had once pulled skips and flat cars through a steel works, and some tracks and 3 flat cars, all of which found at a scrap heap somewhere. And once they'd laid the tracks in and around the trees of the old garden, they would stoke up the Orenstein and Koppel every Saturday and Sunday, and off they'd go, giving rides to children in the afternoon, and when evening came on and they began drinking beer and singing rides to one another, or else they would all crowd together on the locomotive, and it would look like a statue of the river god Nile, the figure of a naked reclining Ordonez, dotted with figurines. I believe they're referring to the Egyptian thing. One day I went to see my uncle to find a place for my press, and as night fell and the train and its lights aglow rounded the apple and pear tree bins at top speed, I watched him sitting in his signal tower, busy at the switches, and to judge by the intermittently flashing aluminium tankard, every bit as well lubricated as the Orenstein and Koppel. Since I walked through the children's whoops and the old men's hoots without being invited to join in or asked whether I wanted a drink, they were all too involved in their games, which were really nothing more than the jobs they enjoyed all their lives. I simply kept walking, marked like Cain, and when, after walking on my own for an hour or so, I returned to see whether anyone would call me over, what I saw was that no one even recognized me, and when, after passing through the gate, I turned one time, what I saw by the light of the lanterns and the brightly lit signal tower was a flurry of silhouettes, and the train following them with a whistle and the clank and a clank on yet another journey along the crumpled ellipticis of its tracks, hurdy-gurdy playing and replaying a single tune. A tune so catchy you never wanted to hear another as long as you lived. And even though no one could possibly have seen me from so far off, I could tell that my uncle saw me, that he had never taken his eyes off me all the time I was wandering through the trees, and he lifted his hands from the controls and waggled his fingers at me in an odd way, as if trying to make the air vibrate, and I waved back at him through the darkness, and we seemed to be saying goodbye from trains rushing in opposite directions. When I reached the outskirts of Prague, I bought a sausage, and I was scared, because without raising it to my mouth, I could feel it brushing my hot lips. And when I looked down, I was holding it at waist level. What I did see, but the other end touching my shoes, but when I lifted it in both hands, it looked perfectly normal. So I knew I had shriveled up, shrunk in the last 10 years. When I got home, I pushed a couple hundred books away from the kitchen door and found the lines I used to draw on the frame with an indelible pencil to show how tall I had been on a given date, and I picked up a book, stepped back against the door frame, and pressed the book flat on my head. And when I turned in place and drew another line there, I could tell with the naked eye that in 8 years I had shrunk 4 inches, and I decided I must have shrunk under the weight of that 2-ton canopy of books. Well, that was 2 chapters of Too Loud a Solitude. I'm a very big fan of the way this is written. I think it's incredibly dense. He uses a lot of interesting allegories, metaphors. Obviously, the language is very flowery. Like, this was 20 pages he just described, describing like a very direct, like, basic relationship with literature, and yet it was so visceral and emotional, and for that reason I hold this book in great esteem. If you'd like to see more of these reading live streams, particularly of this book, I guess just let me know in the live chat or comments or whatever. I think I've been done in for the day. See, did anyone I want to see if anyone even said anything in the live chat. Wait a minute. I'm getting really nigger over here. Wait, was there no? Oh, okay. Do a kickflip. That's mine. Ayumu Kasuga would die if she tried a kickflip. That's true. This is a nice chair. Yeah. See you all later. Wait a minute. It can't stop streaming through this fucking tripod. There.